Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Martin Sellers, Dean of the School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, coming to you live from the beautiful campus of Lincoln Memorial University in Harrogate, Tennessee. We have a wonderful program for you. For those of you that have been listening over the weeks, you know that we have a program referred to as American Culture, Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and the programs that we're bringing are our attempt to bring to your attention how the many programs, the many majors, if you will, in the School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, how they have an effect on our American culture. And today we're going to be talking about Abraham Lincoln.
Support for this program is made possible by Lincoln Memorial University in Harrogate, Tennessee. Further information on academics, campus life, educational programs, admissions and financial aid, and much more, www.lmunet.edu.
And today's program, American Culture, Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, Abraham Lincoln, a monument to civic development and our political system. We have some excellent guests here with us, some experts, if you will, on Lincoln. Today we'll be honored to have with us, privileged to have with us, Dr. Charles Hubbard, Professor of History and Abraham Lincoln Historian here at Lincoln Memorial University. We'll also have with us Dr. Michael Toomey, Assistant Dean of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences and Professor of History, and Natalie Sweet, Adjunct Professor of History and Instructor of our Lincoln courses, our Lincoln 100 and 300 courses. I think we put them together and call that Life and Legacy of Abraham Lincoln. We will, as usual, dive into the subject matter shortly. I think it'll be a very attractive, very interesting discussion about Abraham Lincoln and how our political system, our culture has been affected by the many values and virtues of Abraham Lincoln and his growth in the political arena, if you will, and how the effect on our Constitution has taken place. Before we go there, though, I'd like to say a few things about LMU. As you all probably know, if you don't know, we have 9 schools here in Lincoln Memorial. Allied Health Sciences, School of Business, Carter Moyer's School of Education, the School of Math and Sciences, the Kaler School of Nursing, the DeBusk College of Osteopathic Medicine, the Duncan School of Law, located in Knoxville, and the College of Veterinary Medicine, and, of course, Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. We have in our school the Paul V. Hamilton School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, 10 majors. They are art, media, English, history, music, psychology. We also have criminal justice, political science, social work, and a plethora of minors and tracks and concentrations and so on. I do want to mention that one of the things I told our theater department I'd remind everybody about is we do have the play coming up in the end of October here, The Crucible, an Arthur Miller play. I think all of you will be excited to come and see that. For students and faculty and staff, it's free. If you're off campus and listening to this program, and if you call me up, I'll get you some free tickets, I promise. That's at 423-869-6815. You give me a call, I'll get you free tickets. If you're part of a church and you want to bring 20 or 30 of your members over, we certainly can accommodate you, that group. We have a wonderful auditorium in Duke Hall, the Sam and Sue Mars auditorium of performing arts over here in Duke Hall, and it accommodates 505 persons to sit down all at one time. We can certainly fill that auditorium with you and anybody else. Also, I want to mention that if you're listening, and we have so many programs here on the LMU campus in all of these schools that I mentioned, professional programs and undergraduate programs, that if you're considering going back to school, you might be a veteran coming out the military and have access to veteran benefits, or you might be somebody who's got a 2-year degree, or you might have no degree work whatsoever. You may have no credits whatsoever, and you're thinking about going back to school. Just give us a call. Take a look at our web pages, www.lmunet.edu. There's a menu there. It says admissions. Click on admissions. and contact us or contact me, again, 423-869-6815, and we will find a way to get you to success. There are so many programs, so many things to do here at Lincoln Memorial. We wouldn't have time in having 10 shows back to back, 10 hours of time, couldn't talk about all of that at one time. But I do want to remind you that we are here to help you to move forward in your life. If you're working somewhere and you want to move forward in your career, we have so many professional programs. Last time I counted, we have, I believe it's 15 master degree programs and 8 doctoral degree terminal degree programs in everything from nursing to business to here in arts, humanities, and social sciences. We have 2 graduate programs. One of them is a Master of Science in Criminal Justice, and the other is a Master of Public Administration. So certainly get in touch with admissions, and we'll find a way to move you into a pathway to success. So program today is all about Abraham Lincoln, a monument to civic development and our political system. Our guest, again, sitting right next to me, I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves, say a few words about themselves, where they're from, formal education, and then we'll move on into the program. And I'll start with Dr. Hubbard. If you would say a few things about yourself.
Well, my name is Charles Hubbard, and I teach history here at LMU, and I've been here for 25 years now. Some time back, I was the director of the museum for 12 years, and I've always enjoyed my time here. And I'm originally from Georgia, grew up in Georgia, and moved to Chattanooga, where we live now, and I come up and stay here during the week. And my formal education is graduated from Mercer University as an undergraduate with a degree in history and philosophy. Then I went to Middle Tennessee State, where I got a master's in history, and to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville for a PhD in American diplomatic history and foreign policy. And my special interest, of course, within that subdiscipline was the diplomacy of Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War.
And Dr. Toomey?
My name's Michael Toomey. I originally from Memphis, West Tennessee. I moved here in the early 1960s to East Tennessee with my family. I've been living here ever since. Came up to Knoxville in 1982 to go to graduate school, and I graduated with my doctorate in 1991 from the University of Tennessee. My main interest is Tennessee history in a broad sense, but frontier and Appalachian history beyond that. Since coming here, I've started to be a little more focused on Abraham Lincoln. I was hired to coordinate the Lincoln courses, and so I began to do a little more research into Abraham Lincoln. So that's one of my fields now as well.
And we have instructor Natalie Sweet. Do you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Natalie Sweet. I'm actually local. I'm from Tazewell, Tennessee, and I'm also a Lincoln Memorial University alum. I graduated in 2008 and then studied with Dr. Earl Hess, who really helped me develop as a historian, doing research, drew my interest to the Civil War and to Abraham Lincoln particularly. And after I finished my undergraduate work here, I went to the University of Kentucky thanks to the James Steele Fellowship. James Steele, of course, being a former student of LMU too, and they had special funding for LMU graduates. So after that, I came back here. I teach Lincoln 100 and 300 courses. Have really been working on some of the local history of the area as well, particularly dealing with the former orphanage that used to be in Harrogate, the Grace Nettleton home.
Right. Just right up here on the other side of the highway. Yes, ma'am. I jogged past there. It's a beautiful home, and someone is restored. It's being restored as we speak.
It is. There's a marker outside too.
Well, if you've been listening to us over the last number of weeks, you know that once in a while we we throw out a question that's controversial, and I want to let you all know that before the end of this program, I'm going to ask these three fine experts this question. What do you think Lincoln would say about our current presidential campaign? Now, that question is going to come about shortly, but not right now. First, I want to ask Dr. Toomey and maybe Natalie, who teaches the 100 and 300 courses for Lincoln. Can you tell us a little bit about why we have mission courses on Lincoln? How do they operate? What are they about?
Well, now you've got me thinking about what I'm going to say, but let's get to this question. Lincoln 100, Lincoln 300. As part of the Lincoln Memorial University mission statement, it includes a provision that we will honor the life and the legacy of Abraham Lincoln and some of his values, including his focus on good citizenship. We do that through two courses. Lincoln 100 is a very broad biography sort of narrative that focuses on Lincoln's life and his legacy in a very broad sense. So we cover all the way from his birth, all the way through his assassination, and to some of the ways he's been remembered since then. Lincoln 300 is a junior course. Students take that when they are into their junior year, and it focuses on your responsibility as a member of society, not just as an LMU graduate, but as a citizen of this country. That's one of the things Lincoln did. He took his citizenship very seriously, his responsibilities very seriously. We encourage students when they leave here to be aware of the fact that they're going to return to their communities with a college degree, and certain things are going to be expected of them. At the very least, it'll be expected that they will be involved in what's taking place in their community and in their nation. And so Lincoln 300 reinforces that concept.
Mm-hmm. And Natalie, I know you teach both of these courses. In fact, I think this semester you're teaching both.
Yes.
100 and 300. And it just strikes me that the 100 course is a little bit more historical, would you say?
It is. We do focus more on Lincoln's life and looking at his journey from boyhood to a man, but also...
And that was quite a journey from what we know.
Yes. It is. And one of the things, too, that we do in the class is that there's so much competing mythology for Lincoln, separating what really Lincoln was and who he was, and what the reality is, and understanding, that mythology that we create and where it comes from, and what it really says about us when we're looking at him in this way. And I think one of the great things about Lincoln 100 and 300 too is that whereas Lincoln 100 kind of provides a basis for students to understand why the university too is here and where they're coming from, Lincoln 300 then prepares them to go forward into the future to participate as citizens within their communities and within the nation.
I hate for those mythologies to be subverted and taken away. I remember growing up, I was told, I think my father must have told me, Lincoln ran or walked 26 miles to give somebody back 3 pennies. And of course I said to him, were they the pennies that had his picture on it? And he, of course that couldn't have been the case, but there's a lot of myths out there, that's true, and I appreciate the dispelling of those. And certainly I've taught the 300 course myself a time or two, and we get into the Constitution, Articles of Confederation, some of the great documents, Declaration of Independence, and try to figure out as a class how they impact on our lives today. And that's what I really wanted to have the program get into today. And we're going to take a short break, though, before we come back and talk about Abraham Lincoln and his legacy. Again, this is Dr. Martin Sellers, Dean of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, American Culture. Thank you.
On Wednesday evenings, you can tune your radio to WLMU and hear the best blues in the tri-state area with your host, Gary Daniels. He'll be playing the best blues artists of today and the best blues artists of yesteryear. Everything from Robert Johnson, Buddy Guy, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Muddy Waters, and many more. It's Wednesday Evening Blues from 9 to 11, right here on 91.3 WLMU.
It's me, your heart. High blood pressure is serious, and if you think I'm just gonna keep ticking away, you're wrong. I can quit whenever I want, but I like my job. Just treat me better. Maybe we can do some exercise on occasion? After all, we're in this together.
Don't let your heart quit on you. High blood pressure can lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get yours to a healthy range before it's too late. Find out how at heart.org/blood pressure. A message from the American Heart Association, the American Stroke Association, and the Ad Council.
Hello again, this is Dr. Martin Sellers, Dean of the School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, coming back to you with our program today, American Culture, Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. And today we're talking about Abraham Lincoln. Of course, here we are at Abraham Lincoln's Memorial University, right? And we should be talking about Abraham Lincoln and finding out, particularly in this season of presidential activity, where Abraham Lincoln was and things like this, and where we are today and why we are evolved as we are as a civic community today. And along those lines, I have guests with us today. We have Dr. Charles Hubbard, Professor of History and Abraham Lincoln Historian, Dr. Michael Toomey, Assistant Dean of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and Professor of History, and Natalie Sweet, Adjunct Professor of History and Instructor of our Lincoln courses, Lincoln 100 and 300, The Life and Times and Legacy of Abraham Lincoln. Let me ask this question to, I'll pose this, I guess, to Dr. Hubbard first, and certainly the conversation, anybody can jump in, but when you think about Abraham Lincoln, what was the sources of his American identity and citizenship? Where did Lincoln draw from when we think about how he was as an American and as a citizen of the United States? Where did he draw that sense of history and stability and who he was as a person? What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, that's a rather sweeping question, and I'm not sure there's an easy answer. I would say that the essence of Abraham Lincoln and who he was is he's a child of the frontier. Grew up on the frontier, first in Kentucky as a small child, and then his family moved to Indiana, and it was there that he passed from a child really to a young teenager, a young man, and then the family moved to, later on, when he was 18, they moved again to Illinois. So this process of moving along with the frontier and carving out a space with his family on the frontier, I think created a certain depth of character that all Americans seem to feel they have: self-sufficiency, a self-determination, a self-confidence. All of these things Lincoln had, but that is not to suggest that he's not a person filled with doubts and reservations and having to cope with many of the problems that all young people and all people, I guess, Americans and otherwise, have to confront. Connecting to the social society that he lived in, the social environment, connecting to the rural environment where he lived, and the relationships with his family also contribute to the shaping of his character. And Dr. Toomey is probably as well, probably more capable of responding to this question. He's spent a little bit more time and effort looking into Lincoln's early life and how that shaped his character. So you might be a better person to respond to this than me, Dr. Toomey.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. One of the things we can do in Lincoln 100 is make Lincoln a little bit more approachable for our students, and we do that by emphasizing some of the problems he dealt with. We were talking during the break about that very thing. For example, growing up in his father's farm, he didn't much like his father, and they didn't get along too well at all. He was very anxious to leave home, and when he does leave home, he has a hard time finding a job, and then he has a hard time keeping a job. He doesn't really even know what he wants to do. He has a very, very hard time with women. It's a very awkward thing for him to try and be in any sort of romantic relationship. He is constantly in debt, has a hard time dealing with his money problems. You could go on and on, but these are all things that people can sort of understand as real problems in the early 1800s. They're real problems now. And that makes him someone that they can see as not just the president, the great emancipator, and the savior of the Union, but a real person.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting to me that when I think of Abraham Lincoln, I think of a great statesman, a great politician, a person of high integrity, and yet he came from such humble means and difficulties, as you mentioned earlier, with his family and so on, mother dying at his younger age and so on. What can students, let's say, or any of us learn from thinking about Lincoln as a role model, from coming from those humble means to becoming, in our minds, a statesman, great politician? What would you say about that? Natalie, what about that?
Well, one thing that I think I admire about Lincoln as he moves through life, and particularly not necessarily so much when he's younger, but more as he's older, he reaches this point where he forms what Doris Kearns Goodwin calls a team of rivals, made up of a cabinet that have differing opinions. In some cases, they outright dislike each other. But Lincoln has a habit of going to them for their thoughts, listening to them, taking them into consideration. But then, he goes forward with the decision that after he's reflected on it, he goes forward. It may not be a quick decision, but he eventually gets there. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't always have, I think, this temperamental pacing. He doesn't arrive at this moment where he's this reflective person. He has incidences in his earlier life where he's nearly involved in a duel, for example, of hot tempers. But he learns from mistakes throughout his life. He takes lessons from that, and it makes him into the person that he is when he is president. Mm-hmm. He doesn't emerge as a young man just as Abraham Lincoln in the top hat that we see when we think about him today.
That it reminds me of that movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray. As you're speaking, I'm thinking, yeah, that's me. That's I made those mistakes, and I learned from those mistakes. I think of Lincoln sometimes, and the things that he did or has reflected on as having done, maybe could have done better. I think we all think that sometimes, that we could have done things better, and we have a chance to reflect. Also, when I think of Abraham Lincoln, I think of a person of great virtue. What would, any of you, what would you say would be, in your opinion, a civic virtue that Lincoln best personifies? What would you say to that?
Virtuousness. That's an interesting question, and I think it poses the first question is, of course, how do you define virtuousness, and what is that? I think if you're talking about a value system, a ethical foundation, I think that's where we can really look at Lincoln and learn a great deal. Lincoln understood certain fundamental principles: the dignity of man, the dignity of humankind, and the protection of certain inalienable rights. Lincoln certainly believed in those, and believed that every person was entitled to those rights, and that they were not necessarily given or granted or even protected, for that matter, by the government, but more particularly they're God-given rights, and everyone is deserving of those. And that's a rather virtuous position, and a rather abstract one for some of us to comprehend. So I think for Lincoln, as a man of virtue, a man of ethical values, I'm reminded of Lincoln writing a quote once to a group of law students. And I can paraphrase it. Probably should have brought it along. Maybe Michael or Natalie can quote it verbatim. But this is called the Lincoln, the lawyer fragment. And in this statement, Lincoln says that the perception of lawyers in his day and age, and he was an attorney, an accomplished attorney, by the way, he says that their reputation of lawyers is that they are dishonest. And he goes on to say that's not true, of course, and he says if one has to be dishonest to be a lawyer, it is best for one to seek another vocation, and one that he can be honest in. Lincoln was committed to honesty, integrity, and I think those are the characteristics that create this larger definition of virtuousness.
It strikes me though, and I'm going to stretch here a little bit. When I think about the Spielberg Lincoln movie, which many of our listeners are aware of, there seemed to be a bit of a duality of how Lincoln approached politics. And in fact, this came up in the recent political debate. And so the idea of authenticity and integrity, it seemed to play out a bit unclear to me by Lincoln having hired folks to go around to the representatives and the senators and offering jobs and so on to get them to vote for the policies that he wanted. What do you think about all of that? Is there anything in that we should decipher?
Well, that was an unusual circumstance. That was to get the 13th Amendment through Congress, and that was something he felt very, very strongly about. And so he was willing to push the edges of the envelope a little bit, I think, quite a bit, in fact, in that circumstance. Generally speaking, and Dr. Hubbard can speak more to this than I can, I don't know that we have any indication that he was quite as willing to dispense patronage in exchange for votes. He may have done it, but certainly he did it then and made no apologies about it. He believed that passing the 13th Amendment was more important at that point than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think this. It may seem a bit unfair when I say this, but I think Lincoln at times can be a rather ruthless politician, and by that I mean he was first and foremost a politician. I mean, the man was ran for president twice. He ran for the Senate. He was he wanted to get things done, and to get things done, one has to politic a bit. And Lincoln was once accused of being two-faced because he often had a public policy or a public face that was not necessarily reflected in his private affairs or he kept many of his. He was a person that maintained a certain confidence in himself and a certain reserve, not a spontaneous kind of person. And so he was accused of being two-faced. And an interesting story is that when he was accused of being a two-faced person, he said, well, if I had another face, do you think I would wear this one? Because he was often so famous about being accused of being ugly and gangly. But Lincoln was all about accomplishing the task before him, and he used the means that were necessary in his time and age to get that done. The 13th Amendment was critical to saving the Union and critical to his fundamental commitment that on free people and liberty for all folk. And I think that is where Lincoln uses his political skill.
And of course, the 13th Amendment is all about freedom.
Well, it's all about making slavery illegal.
Yes, exactly right. We're going to take a short break. I want to thank our guests so far. It's been an interesting discussion, and we're going to move into it a little further as we come back in a minute or two. Thank you for listening.
Tyler Rowlett here, host of the Friday Afternoon Jam, where I bring you the best alt-rock and jam bands from the 90s to today. I'll be playing sweet jams from artists like the Black Crowes, Fish, and the best alt-rock from bands like Taking Back Sunday,
Your lipstick is calling up by the angel. I know exactly what goes on.
and Tonight Alive. It's every Friday from 2 to 4, right here on 91.3 WLMU.
A ranger station.
I'd like to report a bear hug.
Okay.
I put out my campfire and Smokey Bear hugged me.
So you drowned the fire, you stirred it, drowned it again, and felt that it was cold?
Uh-huh.
Yep, he's just letting you know you did good.
Bear hug from Smokey Bear. Status update.
I'm gonna let you go now. There are many ways to start a fire, but one sure way to put it out. Learn how you can do your part at SmokeyBear.com.
Sponsored by the U.S. Forest Service Ad Council and your state forester.
Did you just look down at your phone? You did it again, didn't you? You know, you're flying down the road in a 3-ton hunk of steel, and a text takes your eyes off the road for an average of 5 seconds. At 55 miles per hour, that's long enough to travel the length of a football field and cause some serious damage. Turn it off. Trust me, whatever it is, you'll live.
Learn more at StopTextsStopWrecks.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
American Culture, Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. This is Dr. Martin Sellers, Dean of the School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, coming to you from the beautiful campus of Lincoln Memorial University. And we're coming to you live, WLMU Radio, a production of 91.3 FM, Lincoln Memorial University, Harrogate, Tennessee.
Support for this program is made possible by Lincoln Memorial University in Harrogate, Tennessee. Further information on academics, campus life, athletics, educational programs, admissions, and financial aid, www.lmunet.edu.
We are here with our guests today on the program discussing and having a discussion about Abraham Lincoln, Dr. Charles Hubbard, Professor of History and Abraham Lincoln Scholar, Dr. Michael Toomey, Assistant Dean of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences and Professor of History, and of course Natalie Sweet, Adjunct Professor of History and Instructor for our Lincoln classes, also doing an online Lincoln class, which is, she just explained to me, has been a battle that she has been able to win and get students to learn online, which is a big help to us. We've been talking about Abraham Lincoln and some of the broader issues of how he came to be who he is as a statesman, a politician. And I wanted to ask all of you, how did some of the problems and challenges faced by Abraham Lincoln in his early years, how do you think those problems and challenges helped to serve him, to make him who he eventually became? Dr. Toomey, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Well, one thing I like to look at is his writing. This guy was an incredible writer. But if you look at the things he wrote in his early years, some of them are, while they're very skilled, they're also sometimes quite mean-spirited and quite, well, let's face it, nasty, hurtful. He's a very good writer and skillful writer, but he has to learn how to which buttons he wants to push in people. Mm-hmm. And by the time he's through, he's writing things like the Gettysburg Address, the second inaugural. He's pushing buttons in people that make them think about what their country has been, can be, should be, and inspiring them to greater things. But that's not what it was like when he started off. And Natalie mentioned the duel. That came about because of something he'd written, and something he'd written that made a man so angry he wanted to actually kill Abraham Lincoln and challenged him to a duel, at which point Lincoln finally realized that he needed to tone things down a little bit. And from that point on, you see a little bit of start to see a change in the way he writes, and ultimately, as I said, getting into some of the best writing any presidential administration can ever have.
Mm-hmm. We've kind of gone around the fringes of the Civil War. We didn't get to that yet, but I want to move in that direction, if you would. And again, any of you can chime in on or speak to this. One of you gave me a suggested discussion point here. Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall once said, "While the Union survived the Civil War, the Constitution did not." What does that mean to you?
Well, let me say that that means that the Constitution was changed by the so-called Reconstruction Amendments. The Reconstruction Amendments we generally classify as the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And the subtlety of that is that prior to the passage of these amendments, the Constitution was all about protecting the personal liberties and freedoms of Americans from the encroachment of government. Now, after the passage of these amendments, the Constitution becomes the protector of those rights. In other words, prior to this, your rights were protected from the government. After that, the government becomes the protector of those rights. The 13th Amendment, of course, frees the slaves. The 14th Amendment grants equal rights to all Americans, and the 15th Amendment extends the franchise to all citizens, mm-hmm. except women. Mm-hmm. And African American. Well, it does include African Americans. It's designed to include African Americans. Mm-hmm. Later on, we're going to see a series of laws passed, local laws, that will disenfranchise African Americans in a big way. But at this point, the Constitution is altered. That's what he meant.
Along those lines, he's well known as the great emancipator, the savior of the Union. Are there other factors that account for this enduring legacy, great emancipator?
Well, yes, there are, and it has to do with his origins, I think, where he's from. He's a man of the people. He's someone who is we can all identify with because of the fact that he was a hard worker, a farmer. He could swing an axe, he could split a rail. And that's an image, of course, he cultivated later on in life, but it's true. He was all those things. One of the last things some of the soldiers around the Petersburg line, this is near the very end of the Civil War, commented on the fact that Lincoln came through camp and there was an axe lying beside one of the tents, and he was able to pick it up and hold it out at arm's length and do a little bit of gymnastics with it, and really impress them even at that age with his ability to swing an axe. So he's a man of the people. Mm-hmm. He is a success story in that he pulled himself up by his own bootstraps, or at least that's the perception, that he came out of abject poverty to achieve the highest level of success in this country, President of the United States. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of other reasons you can identify with Lincoln, but of course it's hard to get away from those two things, the great emancipator and the savior of the Union. Mm-hmm. If he'd done either one of those, he would have been entitled to immortality, and he did both of them. Yeah.
And you know what's interesting is that in his own day, he might have been considered what we would today think of as a flip-flopper, someone who flips-flops mm-hmm. on the issue. Mm-hmm. But again, to go back to a point that was made earlier, he develops as he goes through. As late as 1862, he's still trying to put forth a plan for colonization to send former slaves back to Africa. That doesn't come about by the time we get further to Antietam. We have the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation and then the Emancipation Proclamation itself. And even with the Emancipation Proclamation, he's not gotten to the point exactly where he's thinking about voting rights for African Americans. That gradually comes along to the point of 1865.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was some discussion in his campaign that he wasn't necessarily fully in favor of voting rights for freed slaves, if you will. which says something about, as you say, flip-flopper, or someone who has evolved, maybe a better way of looking at that, or another way of looking at that.
But he has interactions with others. He has interactions with African Americans. I've studied some of, particularly his usher in the White House, William Slade, who was very active in the D.C. community to try to get voting rights for African Americans. He's working before the 15th, before really even Lincoln's thinking about it.
Natalie, you mentioned a little while, I think it was you mentioned about the team of rivals and how he brought persons into his cabinet. I think that's one of the most interesting things to me, is that he was not afraid to listen to opposing. In fact, it strikes me, and any of you can speak to this, it strikes me that he looked forward to bringing forward good leaders, good thinkers, even if they were diametrically opposed to his ideas. And somehow he was able to mold all that oppositional thinking into some plan or policy. Is that a fair statement?
I would say that it is. We see him, for example, he brings on William Seward as his Secretary of State, and that had really been his competition for the Republican nomination in 1860. And there was some politicking going on at that convention. Lincoln supporters had sat Seward's supporters further away for when they were giving the calls up that they couldn't be as well heard, and they had even spread through some false tickets so
really
that people couldn't get in. No evidence, I don't think, that Lincoln directly knew what they were doing, since the nominees traditionally weren't there, but that was what his supporters were doing.
Doing what they could to put the right candidate in the right place. Let's turn toward the Gettysburg Address a bit. This is one of the arguably best known pieces of writing. It was short, but immensely meaningful in so many ways. Some of the meaning may be a little bit hidden from most of us unless we are a student of that era. Dr. Hubbard, what are your thoughts about the Gettysburg Address, if you will?
I think it was sure a good speech. And given the amount of time that we have. But the Gettysburg Address, of course, is interesting in a lot of ways. But one of the things that happened is Edward Everett, the orator, probably considered to be the greatest orator in the country at the time, former president of Harvard University and a minister to England, came to deliver the keynote address at the dedication of the cemetery at Gettysburg. And when he did that, he spoke for over 2 hours. And Lincoln was sort of added on because the organizers realized at the last minute that we've got to ask the president at least to come. So the president came sort of an afterthought, and he was to cut the ribbon and dedicate the cemetery, not make the real speech. Well, he got up and made this speech, and Everett said later, my remarks will probably never be remembered, certainly not the whole 2 hours, but your remarks will live forever.
Nice.
And so they do. And what Lincoln is doing there is trying to explain the reason for this incredible sacrifice. And it's transformational in that it explains what the war is all about in a paragraph or two. I don't remember exactly how many words it is. Do you, Michael?
272.
272 words.
It's, as I tell my students, a quality discussion board post is at least 250 words. So the Gettysburg Address.
It met that requirement, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're certainly having a good time talking about Abraham Lincoln and his meaningful to us and to our American culture. Certainly one of the most illustrious and meaningful, memorable characters in our history, lives today at Lincoln Memorial University. We'll be back in a short break. Thank you.
Would your business survive a disaster? Nearly 2/3 of businesses aren't prepared for an emergency, and 40% of businesses that experience a disaster never recover. Make an emergency plan now, before it's too late. For a free online tool that helps you develop an emergency plan to keep your business up and running should disaster strike, visit ready.gov/business. Brought to you by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the American Red Cross, and the Ad Council.
Here we are back again with our program today, American Culture, Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. And we have as guests today Dr. Charles Hubbard, Professor of History and Abraham Lincoln Historian, Dr. Michael Toomey, Assistant Dean of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and Professor of History, and Natalie Sweet, Adjunct Professor of History and Instructor of our Lincoln Life and Legacy Abraham Lincoln courses. We're having a good and lively discussion about Abraham Lincoln and his meaningfulness to our American culture. I want to bring Lincoln into the current day, though. Before I do want to ask this one question about Lincoln and the Civil War. And if it's okay, I'd like each of you to respond to this. What would you say would be, in your view, the most significant input or aspect of Lincoln with regard to the war? What would you say would be something most significant about Lincoln and his approach to involvement in decision making over? Just give me one major and significant element there, if you would.
I'll start first because I think we're all thinking the same thing, and that's the Emancipation Proclamation. It just completely and entirely changed the whole purpose of the war. Up until that point, this has been a war to save the Union, and it didn't stop being that. It continued to be that. But in addition now, after the Emancipation Proclamation, this is a war with a moral edge to it. It is a war to end slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation in and of itself doesn't actually complete that process, but it is very clearly the beginning of that process and signals a whole new shift in what this war is about. And that it just literally changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a great book, Why We Fight. I think James McPherson is the author of that book. And what he does is he takes soldiers' letters, and they're giving their reasons for fighting. And with the Emancipation Proclamation, you really do see a shift in what they are talking about. It's moved from being not just this effort to preserve the Union, which I think, we hear that today and we kind of think, well, okay, and that seems like a good thing to us, but it's also to understand too that at that time, not outside of the United States, democracies, they haven't always been doing that great. We're kind of this last great experiment, and if we fail, what does that mean for democracy as a whole? Is it a failed experiment? Mm-hmm. So there's that preservation of the Union, but now you also have this crusade that comes through. We hear it in the Battle Hymn of the Republic. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. Mm-hmm. And that really comes through as an extra push.
And there's the focus on equality and fairness, and then we get into voting and that. Dr. Hubbard?
Well, first of all, I certainly agree with that. I think that we can see, as Natalie mentioned, we can see in For Cause and Freedom, which is McPherson's book that she mentioned, which came out about the same time as our own Earl Hess's book, The Union Soldier in Battle. Both of these books focus on the letters written by soldiers, and particularly Dr. Hess's book emphasizes the Union soldier and how their attitude, particularly in the Western campaign, the soldiers from Indiana, Illinois, how their attitude about slavery changed as they were exposed and witnessed slavery as it was being applied in the territories that they were coming into. But having said that, let me just say that one of the things I think Lincoln connects to as much as anything with the war effort is not what the accomplishments ultimately are, but his ability as a leader, his ability to transform the soldiers, call upon them to make these incredible sacrifices, his motivation, his ability to motivate, to unite the American people behind the cause. And I think his ability to lead is one of the outstanding characteristics that's so often overlooked. As Natalie mentioned earlier in the Team of Rivals, And as Dr. Toomey mentioned, the Shields incident of the duel, Shields will wind up later in the war being one of Lincoln's generals. Not a major one, but nevertheless, and whether we can argue about whether he was effective or not, but nevertheless, Lincoln got over it, and he gets over his resentment in the cabinet, for example, with Stanton, who humiliated him in a court trial earlier, and yet he makes him Secretary of War.
I think these are fascinating examples of good excellence in leadership. It really is.
And one of the things also that makes him a great leader is he has this remarkable ability to communicate with people. Michael mentioned his ability to write. I think his oratory is the Gettysburg Address is a good example. He understood his audience and how to communicate with that particular audience at any given time, whether it's a frontier jury as a lawyer, or whether it's a soldier on the battlefields of Antietam, or whether it's a general or a politician in the White House. I think Lincoln's ability to lead is one of the characteristics that we often overlook when we are assessing Lincoln as a president and as a leader during the war.
Let me and thank you for that. This is a good summation from all of you. Let me bring Abraham Lincoln into today's world a bit. Many of us, except for maybe Natalie and John, have been around a number of presidential campaigns and elections. And how many times have we heard, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, speak about Lincoln, having that this person running for office has those same qualities. They can lead like Lincoln. They remember how he invoked integrity and his virtues, and they have. Why is that the case? Why are so many, regardless of their political affiliation, why are so many? And recently, I mean, we heard Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton both invoke the name of Lincoln. Why is that the case? Why would you say that would be the case?
Well, Lincoln wins elections. I don't know how else to put it. As soon as he was assassinated, keep in mind he is assassinated at the very height of his popularity. He'd not been a particularly popular president until mid-1864. He'd been popular, but not immensely popular until then. When it became obvious war was going to be won, and on his terms, suddenly he is everybody's hero. And after re-election, especially after victory, after the 13th Amendment is passed, he is at the height of his popularity, and it is at that point that he's assassinated. And that pushes him even further into an area that no president, with the exception of George Washington, had ever been. So that image is what people are grabbing a hold of. That is what they're trying to take advantage of. Riding Lincoln's coattails into the White House was something Republicans did for the rest of that century. Campaign posters routinely had Lincoln's picture on it, not for any reason other than just, here's a picture of Abraham Lincoln on my campaign poster, vote for me. And it worked.
Has the Republican Party changed since those days, in your opinion? Anyone?
Well, I grew up in Georgia, and we didn't have a lot of Lincoln stuff when I was growing up, in my generation. But even now, I think Lincoln still is the image that people want to associate with. His reputation for integrity and character and leadership and perseverance, and the thing that Natalie mentioned earlier, living the American dream from the most humble beginnings with a dirt floor and a log cabin to the White House. All of these kind of things resonate with America and with the popular voter. They're popular with voters. So, but other things, like I'm thinking of the Lincoln National Insurance Company. At one time they sort of co-opted Lincoln, because all of a sudden, by naming ourselves the Lincoln Insurance Company, we've got integrity, we've got character, we've got reputation. And when you can associate yourself in some way, the Lincoln Savings Bank of Philadelphia even the Lincoln log cabin syrup that you can buy a bottle of that, and everybody wanted to attach themselves to Lincoln, the great American, the honest Abe, all of these things that we have associated him, whether it's mythology or not. It worked, and it sold product, and I think that's why politicians gravitate and use Lincoln today. His reputation, suddenly, if we can be like Lincoln, we must have character, we must have integrity, we must be good leaders.
Now, I did promise I was going to ask this question. I know Gary says we have about 3 more minutes. What do you think Abraham Lincoln would say today about the current presidential campaign? And I'd ask all of you to speak your mind on this. What would he say? He popped up today and looked around. What would he say? Now, remember, we're on radio, so we can...
I think one of the first things Lincoln would say is, what is a tweet?
Or a hashtag.
It reminds me of a question I heard on talk radio once where they said, what would the founding fathers think of a tax on a tanning bed? And I said they'd probably be more worried about tanning bed.
But in all seriousness.
On a more serious note, I think Lincoln would probably be as stunned at the incivility of this campaign as many of us are. And I don't know what I can say that some of you haven't heard me say before, which is that, I just think it's just almost disgraceful the way our political campaign, this particular presidential campaign, has deteriorated. It seems to me to be a complete absence of respect and understanding for the voter. I'm almost demeaned by the way the thing's going. Now, what would Lincoln say? I'm sure he wouldn't say what I just said. And I'll let some of you all. I frankly don't know what he would say.
Well, politics at the local level, even in Lincoln's time, could get pretty nasty. And there were, I don't know anything as profound as what we've heard recently, but state races could get pretty bad. And so Lincoln was not unaware of that type of political discourse. But at the presidential level, it was unheard of in his time. In fact, presidential campaigning was only recently becoming something that was deemed acceptable. At one time, for a president to run for office was considered just downright disgraceful. You stood for office. That's what the phrase originally was. I'm going to stand for office. If someone was accused of running for office, that was an insult. It was suggested you were overly ambitious. And so he himself didn't campaign too much in either of his elections. He simply told people my positions are well known, well written, and if you want to go look them up, I can tell you where to find them. So he would have been surprised to see this type of discourse taking place at the presidential level. And maybe surprised isn't even the right word. It's just hard to say. Stunned, says Dr. Hubbard.
Natalie, what do you think about that?
Going back to those civic virtues that you asked about earlier, the thought that I had was something I briefly brought up, but Lincoln had the ability to listen, we might say, the modesty to listen to one another. And, he puts the basis of his political belief, political thought, in the Declaration of Independence. Americans are not so much their background as they are their belief in those principles, and he develops into that thought.
Well, I appreciate that you all three have really given a good talk and a clarification of Abraham Lincoln. I think I'm going to change political parties now, but I'm not going to tell you which way. We've had a good time. Appreciate all three of you being on this broadcast today. Dr. Charles Hubbard, Professor of History and Abraham Lincoln Scholar and Historian, Dr. Michael Toomey, Assistant Dean of Arts, Humanities, Social Sciences, and Professor of History, Natalie Sweet, Adjunct Professor of History and Instructor of our Lincoln classes. This is Dr. Martin Sellers, Dean of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, coming to you live from our excellent radio station, FM 91.3.
WLMU, which is supported by Lincoln Memorial University in Harrogate, Tennessee. Further information on academics and campus life, educational programs, admissions, financial aid, and so much more, you can visit their website at www.lmunet.edu.
This afternoon's program was produced by Gary Daniels. Our student production assistant is John Hobbs. Our program director, Clay Stanifer. Our broadcast engineer is Don Burgraff. Our executive producer is Tony Spinoza. Our theme music is White Horses, as performed by Tierra Negra and Muriel Anderson. American Culture, Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at LMU will rebroadcast again Saturday at 10 a.m., Sunday 8 p.m., and next Tuesday at 7 a.m. This has been a WLMU radio production, 91.3 FM, LMU, Harrogate, Tennessee. Thank you for listening.